Presence, the podcast for everyone interested in bodywork, embodiment, and somatic practices. I'm Andrew Rosenstock, your host and guide on this enlightening journey. With my expertise as a somatic movement therapist, yoga therapist, and certified rolfer, I'll merge clinical insight with real-world experience to enrich our discussions with our guests. Through engaging and informative talks, this podcast delves into mind-body paradigms, offering insights and strategies to empower personal growth. Your support is vital for our grassroots and lo-fi production. If you connect with our content, please leave a positive review and subscribe on your preferred platform. Your engagement helps us reach a broader audience and supports our mission. So thanks for tuning in today to Touching into Presence. Fasten your seatbelt as we embark on a journey to explore the transformative power of contemplative and somatic practices together. It was a pleasure today to be in conversation with Raja Selvam, PhD. Raja is a licensed clinical psychologist, is the developer of Integral Somatic Psychology, ISP, an effective somatic therapy that helps clients achieve optimal mental health by fully embodying their emotions. His book, The Practice of Embodying Emotions, a guide for improving cognitive, emotional, and behavioral outcomes, is currently being translated into several languages. Dr. Selvam is also a senior trainer at Dr. Peter Levine Somatic Experiencing International. He has taught for 25 years in over 20 countries in North and South Americas, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and the Far East. Dr. Selvam's work is informed by older body psychotherapy systems of Reichian therapy and bioenergetic analysis, newer body psychotherapy systems of bodydynamic analysis and somatic experiencing, and bodywork systems of postural integration and biodynamic craniosacral therapy. In today's talk, we discussed about what brought Raja to where he is today. We talked about topics from his book, The Practice of Embodying Emotions, the interconnection between the mind, body, and environment in the context of psychology. We explored the complex relationship between pain and pleasure in the human brain, the role of defenses in shaping emotional experiences, and the effectiveness of somatic experiencing as a trauma modality. We also discussed the importance of accepting and managing life's difficulties, the integration of Eastern psychology into our approaches. Anyways, that was a long intro. I'm sure you'd much rather hear our talk than me, so let's begin our talk.
Hey, Roger.
Hi, Andrew.
So for me, this is actually kind of exciting because the last few guests are people I've known or I've studied with. And every now and then we do get people I haven't. So this is, I kind of enjoy the familiarity of being with people I know, but also the awkwardness in the beginning of, we're in this dialogue and how is this going to go and how are we going to connect? So I enjoy that. I found you, as I mentioned to you, via Surge's podcast, but then interestingly, as happens, your name popped up all over the place, including some clients mentioning your book. And so I remember taking a note when I heard you saying, I'd love this guy seems to be very aligned with how I'm seeing a lot of things that are slightly different than maybe the normative. Let me take a note, and then as the universe can do, if you want to give your power to that, you popped up all over the place. So I'm glad to be in conversation with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, from what I've heard, and we'll have you talk more about it, I found your approach. I think there's a lot of body-mind approaches out there that are great. And for me, they maybe slightly miss a little bit of the phenomenological, of the felt. And they go a little bit too much into, for me, too much into the top down and the cognitive. And I heard, and I think that's partly, at least in the U.S., although I think a lot of places, that's the world we live in. And so if we live in a world, we re-encompass that. But what I heard of you and your approach to embodiment, I want to share that, because to me, having been much more in the cognitive and finding practices through strokes of luck, that brought me more into these preconceptual places of being, and then working with people in those spheres and seeing how they change, how they get health, how they get empowerment, how they get agency, and to some extent how easy it is once that paradigm is shifted. And of course, until then, it's not. So, well, I want to share more of this, and that's how I viewed you. So it's really an honor for me to get the chance to be in this dialogue and to also share it. The first general question I always ask, which I think everyone does, is how did Raja get to this place? How did you get on this path? What brought you into this slightly different than the norm path?
Yeah, I think my entry into the field of psychology was motivated by the need to heal and grow personally, and I didn't expect it to become a profession.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
and so in the process of healing and trying different modalities out, and then studying different modalities, after I got into the field, I realized I had more of a personal need to be in my body and be in my emotions. So, and my work right now is about being with emotion in the body. So, and fortunately, the science in the last 20 to 25 years, affective and cognitive neurosciences, have helped a great deal to validate some of the techniques or interventions that I've used that have been found to be effective. Yeah. I'll get concrete a little later, but right now, all I can say is that it's really through personal motivation. I also have a spiritual practice, and it also requires a certain psychological qualification, the ability to tolerate opposites in the body, opposites in emotional experiences in the body. So that is also a motivation. But more than that, it's the personal need to heal, to my past traumas and the imprints they've left. That I find more difficult or not as expedient without the body. So,
For clarification, when you speak of the sort of spiritual and the sense of opposites, is that referring to like non-duality or Advaitic?
Yeah, non-duality. Yeah. My PhD in clinical psychology is in Jungian psychology, in-depth psychology with an emphasis on Jungian psychology. There, for personal development, what is required is a greater capacity for opposites. That brings the ego more in alignment with the self, according to you. And for me, it's about finding it through the body container. In fact, Jung himself said at some point that it was through the body that would happen, even though the practice of Jungian psychology might often appear cerebral. So,
yeah, I'm not as that's lovely to say that. I'm not as familiar with Jungian, and partly because the people I've met that are practiced that are very cerebral. But then I think that's a matter more of it's in every practice that people hear what they hear, and it's not actually what is being said; it's their interpretation of it. So it's interesting for me to actually. It's somewhat interesting. I can see with what little, and I'll admit I know very little of Jungian. I could get a bit of it, but it's still a little bit of, it's interesting because again, so much. When I used to work on some, I had such trouble working with Jungian at least the ones I met, because I couldn't. There was a head, and that was it. There was very little bit, but yeah.
I'll be glad to send you a copy of my dissertation on Jungian psychology and Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I would love to. Answer.
Yeah. And so was that for you where you started to shift more from the the cognitive into the body was because of the Jungian, because of...
It was because of my own personal need for healing my traumas. That was the primary motivation. That it became a profession. It's just the way things turned out, and I found work that I found extremely gratifying to this day. Is perhaps meant to be so. But the motivation was personal healing.
Right. I guess for me, trying to find the correlate of, at least how I understand it, going into a psychology being more of a mental realm, and yet you had some awareness that there was this body, this underneath the mind realm, and how that came through. Yeah.
So when I started therapy, I was immediately drawn to Jungian psychology, and as chance would have it, I was introduced to someone with the Jungian orientation, a therapist. And as chance would have it, at the same time, I was also introduced to somebody who was body oriented. So I was fortunate that I did not. My first degree is not in psychology. So I was fortunate that I took these opportunities and went down this path. And I later on learned other depth psychological approaches such as psychoanalysis to complete my understanding of the field. But the need for personal healing led me to body-oriented psychology on the one hand and Jungian psychology on the other hand, through chance, through friends, through acquaintances. So that's how it turned out.
Well, it's for me, there's actually a lot in there, which I don't know how much we'll get into, but how much of the chance being that so many people get pulled to one pole of the duality or the other pole of the duality, and for a few things, partly through chance, you were able to have both, and then maybe partly through that. I'm not sure if it was through that, but to tie it into the whole meta theme of what we're here is that sense of it's neither one or the other. It's both. Both are actually.
It's both. I've always been that way. My first degree my first PhD is in business, in marketing. So in which we study quite a bit of psychology. And I went to Northwestern University, Kellogg Graduate School of Business. It has quite a reputation.
Yeah.
There, the approach is eclectic. There we had the cognitive psychologists, we had the social psychologists, we had the phenomenologists, and so on. So and I loved it. And then we had the quantitative technologists. So even in the study of marketing, so I like the integral nature of it. And my approach to the field of psychology is this, there are about 400 modalities, and you can always run into a bunch of people in each modality. They swear that it saved their lives. So, the people are different and the modalities are different. And I think that people, by trial and error, self-select themselves to different modalities, But what is interesting of late, this is what I want to come to, is that now we have adequate scientific evidence that clearly demonstrates that cognition, behavior, and emotion, all three aspects of experience, depend not just on the brain, but also on the body and the environment. The science of embodied cognition and the science of embedded cognition clearly show that even cognition that we would least expect to depend on the body and the environment has been demonstrated to be involved in cognition. It's very important. So we can say, for example, now that if you have a modality, therapy modality, that does not work with the body in some way, it's very highly probable that you're not doing your clients as good a service as you could be. That we can say. I just got on the board of United States Association for Body Psychotherapy. Now, the association used to be, and it's still to a large extent, is a bunch of somatic and somatic psychology modalities trying to find community and respect. I think we're well past that. Because now I think there's a greater awareness of the effectiveness of including the body in every modality. Now you have cognitive somatic. I just saw cognitive somatic therapy, etc. Right? So somatic internal family systems and so on. You have, and I've friends in Los Angeles who are teaching, bringing in somatics into psychology courses. So there's a greater awareness, but there's not enough awareness that it really needs to be included, because science is telling us that if you don't include the body in some way, I'm not saying in one particular way, I don't want to promote one modality over the other, you have to take the body and the lived experience of the body, to use the phenomenological term.
Thank you for that.
If you don't do that, then you might not be practicing, as efficiently as someone else who might be. And this applies to psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, any modality you can think of, any of the 400 modalities you can think of. And it's a very exciting time, actually. So, and that's one thing I'm getting more involved in as I age, and I want to give back to the field. I want to, I tell my friends, I want to somatize the entire field of psychology, no pun intended, So, because it needs it. It really needs it.
Well, I would say, because my belief, and hearing you, how I hear it, is because you have experienced the benefits, you have seen the change, and it's hard. Speaking more for myself, it's hard once we see how, again, things could be done with less effort and get more change from it and more shift. It's hard to leave it at that, especially if, as I'm hearing you and putting it through the lens of myself, one of the reasons that I do what I do is to benefit people in whatever way I can. And so if there are things that we can do that we know can bring a benefit to humanity, to go grand scale, why would we not?
Why would we not? And it's almost like I'm passionate about the mission. So, and I have to tell you, I'm a very difficult client. And I see the benefit more directly in my clients and my students. And that is really gratifying.
I think I follow, but can you say more about that as far as seeing with your client?
When I can say that I probably grow a lot slower than some of my clients. And I can see the effectiveness of the embodiment more in my clients because they tell me. And because they're looking for change, they're looking for improvement, they're looking for reduction in suffering, and they can notice it more. Whereas I, as a therapist, I'm also reflective and complex in my analysis of change internally and so on. So,
you have more, I would say, for lack of a better word, you have more baggage coming with you, likely, that you're bringing with you, and they so that the focus is and more different things. And for them, they don't have to focus on that much, and therefore they're able to actually allow shifts in. But I'd say there's sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, I think there's one other point, which is, I would say I'm very similar in that when people meet me and they want to do exchanges, I one of the things I will say is my nervous system is so sensitive that it's very sensitive to even allow change in. However, when I do find people I feel safe with and can receive from them, there's a slowness there. Don't ask me how I feel afterwards. I need time to integrate it in. But that slowness over time actually allows for a big space. And that also allows me to have more space for my clients and to have them move quicker, to move further along, because I myself have been going through these and I can now take them a little further. And I presume it's the same for you.
Yeah, that is true. Absolutely. And the more I can tolerate suffering, the more there's a space for the clients to enter that realm, to work with the necessary suffering we have to work with in order to transform on a deeper level. So.
Yeah, I hear you. I would use slightly, for me personally, I would use slightly different words instead of tolerate. But I understand. I get stuck in words.
Let's say the more capacity I have for suffering.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that or reframing that a bit.
It's a Jungian. Yeah, even in Jungian, it's the capacity for, well, what capacity? Yeah, for the tolerating comes very quickly with it. So.
Well, for me, a lot of it comes down to, I like to use humor, and so some people might get somewhat offended by this, but I'd say one of the best things that allowed me to tolerate suffering more was getting married, because not really about my wife, but about how to be in a position of different power dynamics and seeing people you love hurting and whatnot, and realize it has very little to do with me, and letting myself come back a little bit to allow for more space to accept things a little more. And so we could use the word tolerating. For me, there's a charge to that word that doesn't feel good in my body, but that's okay. We have to figure the linguistics out for everyone. But yeah, that then allowed me to say, how when I'm with clients, how can I see them suffering?
How about to be able to be with the difficult experience longer?
Yeah, I mean, it's to be present.
Yeah, and to be longer, and paradoxically, and not suffer as much.
Yeah. Well, you hit it. For me, the key of almost all of healing is paradoxical. It's really paradoxical, which are, and I like to tell my clients who are in the moment, that makes it harder for you to understand, because the mind wants to understand what it wants. And to some extent, the mind, though I'm, personifying it, doesn't like paradoxes, because paradoxes don't make sense. So it cracks the mind, but that's largely where we're needed.
Yeah. It is there, for example, to get concrete. When people come to me, and perhaps I can introduce an example to make it concrete. Yeah. And it also introduces us to the work that I do in a more specific level. I worked with a volunteer student in a class recently, and she has had long-term digestive issues, pain and indigestion and bloating and the like. But the pain is difficult, and I looked at her history briefly, and she was a premature baby at birth, incubated for a while, suggesting that her troubles might go back to her pre and perinatal trauma. Yeah, it's a significant trauma, and so we started to work. And in the training, I often tell students, they practice on a daily basis. Choose a theme to work with. And she was choosing the theme of anger. Yeah. And somehow it didn't feel quite right that it was anger. Yeah. So as I started to sit with her, I started to sense the fear in her behavior, in her eyes, in her face, but also in the resonance with her. So it gently directed into the realm of fear. Now, and then my work is about when there is an emotion, it is to expand the emotion, the conscious experience of the emotion in the client, to more places in the body. Mm-hmm. That is what I call the practice of embodying emotion. To take an emotion like fear, to have the person experience it in more places than the place that they initially reported in the body. Yeah. So, for example, I think that it was in the throat, she said. But what turned out to be is that she was blocking the throat, and the throat was constricting against the fear. So, and then, so we expanded it. We expanded it. So eventually, but it was very difficult to go there because the anger kept popping up as a defense. Yeah. And so we expanded the fear to more places in the body. It was an uphill struggle. And she said later that I was holding her feet to the fire, so to speak, And so we actually then got it into the belly. We had experience. And and I'll tell you the outcomes. It surprised me what the outcomes of it. But the reason why I do that, why the practice is designed that way, is because of the research on embodied emotions. There's research, multiple studies that show that if you prevent the body from being involved in an emotional experience, the extent to which we do that to prevent the body, different parts of the body, you can say blocking the body from being involved in the emotional experience, then to that extent, the brain, people have studied it, to the extent the brain becomes inefficient at processing the entire situation involving the emotion. So not only knowing what the emotion is, processing the emotion, but also processing the cognitions and the behaviors in the situation to arrive at an optimal resolution of the situation so that one doesn't have to have emotion. Yeah. And so using that finding, there are other findings also. There's another finding that shows now that it's emotion in every moment that determines cognition behavior, not the other way around. This is the movement of affectivism, that many emotion scientists have signed on to of late. Yeah, because there's enough neuroscientific evidence. So I thought, well, if I can make sure, and I also, coming from a body psychotherapy point of view, because many of the systems I trained in, even before I got a formal degree in clinical psychology, are in body psychotherapy modalities. So I know that the primary premise of body psychotherapy modalities is that it's against difficult emotion that we develop blockages or armoring, et cetera, et cetera. So I know how to work with it. So if I can ensure that people are experiencing the emotion consciously in more places, to that extent, I know that more places are not blocking the emotion. Then I can theoretically, scientifically expect that the brain to function better, to have better emotional, cognitive, and behavioral outcomes. That is the whole idea. Now, when I started to expand it, I also found another thing that happens. If the fear, for example, when it was in the chest, and when she could express it and then bring it into the face and the throat, and then she could also feel it in the belly, which was the hardest thing, it paradoxically was easier to be with. The body was breathing more, even though she was in the grasp of the emotion in more places in the body than before. Yeah. And so there's another, it's the brain processes the emotion better, so therefore it can get more regulated, right? And then But there's something about the spreading of the emotion, the impact of the emotion to more places, which I often motivate clients by saying, is it easier to lift a 50-kilogram bag with one arm or two arms? Actually, you can lift 75 kilos with both arms and have less strain on either arm than when you lift just 50 kilograms with one arm, right? So that kind of analogy to motivate them to feel it in more places. And they find that they can be with the emotion. They have more capacity now to be with the emotion. It's more tolerable in that sense, right? So we did that. We didn't do that much of it. And you never know how much one has to do for a client. But next day, she came to me and said, thank you for holding my feet to the fire. Then I also said to her, please put that back anger on the back burner and focus on the fear now. It seems to be. And then she came to me next day and said, I have to tell you, 2 changes. Last night dinner, this morning's breakfast did not lead to the same gastrointestinal suffering that I usually have after meals. And then she said, I had a lower back pain. It's a chronic pain. I've had it forever. 80% of it is gone. Then I said, now you know, fear is your ticket, right? Embody it more. Now, it doesn't mean that the patterns might not revert, but you could see a direct benefit of the practice of embodying emotion that way. So I hear stories like that all the time. We have not done outcomes research in a systematic way, but I know because the method has a priori scientific validity, because we can take the scientific findings and say a method based on scientific findings can theoretically be predicted to produce outcomes. No? So, but we will also do outcomes research with control groups and treatment groups in due course. But I'm so enjoying, doing this. But not only. So we work with from body psychotherapy. I learned how to work with defenses against emotions in the body. But from energy psychology, I also learned how to work with defenses at the energetic level. So we also work on that level. So that kind of, in a way, gives you a nutshell of the simplicity of the approach. It essentially says, spread it in the body. That's what it is. But, you might have to use some techniques to bring that about. Yeah. Sometimes it's harder than other times.
Well, yeah. Sometimes it's harder. And I think one of what I'm going to presume is one of the hardest parts is, and it's been sort of said in another way, but we'll say it almost the same way, have a different meaning, is when you're sitting with I'm going to put my presumptions here based on my own practice, is that when you're sitting with the client, you're really sitting with yourself and you're allowing what appears to appear. And so that the fear and whatnot is not so much that you're looking for it, is you're allowing it to show itself. And that.
I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because that attitude that things will show up underestimates the power of the unconscious. Psychological and somatic and energetic defenses. Freud pointed out that the brain operates through what is called the pleasure principle. That the brain does not like pain. It prefers pleasure, because pleasurable states, by definition, in the body are states of greater regulation and lower stress. And unpleasant experiences are, by definition, states of greater dysregulation and stress, which is counter to survival. So nobody likes pain. I don't like pain.
But when you say like an addiction where people are going into pain, but to get a hit, so that they're going into pain, they're going into stressful places to get hit of the various different neuro chemicals, the endorphins, the serotonins, the whatever, that they are seeking that sort of pain to get their.
I don't know whether they're seeking pain. They're seeking a substance that changes their suffering, that gets them away from suffering.
But I would still say the brain is putting them into that.
Come again?
But you're saying that according to Freud, the brain will always go away from pain. And I'm saying, well, in this case, the brain is going into pain to get out of pain from its own perspective.
I don't think that is, maybe you have to, come up with a better example, but people going to considerable length to obtain a drug, they do that in order to reduce the suffering.
But I would say they're reducing it from their cortical or way of, or maybe even subcortical, their way of understanding. So they're doing it from their own ontological framework, which could be corrupted.
Yeah, it could be. For example, the sadomasochism, there is sadomasochism, right? Mm-hmm. Where you get pleasure from pain. But that is an exception. That is an exception. Like, for example, if I were to just, take a knife to you, and you would go like that. So that's instinctual. And that's what Freud was talking about. And I find myself, I'm quite okay. This is just an innate tendency. Innate defense to avoid pain, to seek the opposite, is just built into the nervous system because it's tied to survival. Because anytime the physiology goes toward dysregulation, it's going in the opposite direction of maximizing survival. And therefore, but then this is why when people come, this is one of the reasons, the practice, for example, is sometimes very difficult for therapists to swallow, because therapists have learned that their purpose, very often these days, they're competing with psychiatrists. They want to do something quick to relieve the person of the symptom. So if somebody comes with an anxiety, for example, great deal of fear, to do something to remove the anxiety, but not to say, let's take the anxiety and spread it in the body. That is paradox. That they cannot wrap their mind around. And they say, well, I don't want to take my client into more suffering, because that's not the role of the therapist. And I say, contrary to the idea, the therapist's role is to take the client to the suffering, the necessary suffering, as quickly as possible. And so then the transformation, deeper transformation, can take place, and that's what spiritual traditions also say. And so,
the question is: are you bringing more anxiety into the body, or are you taking them to the awareness of what's already there? That they're spreading their awareness to the anxiety that's underneath.
It is not there, because what they do, what the psychological defenses, somatic defenses, and energetic defenses do, is to minimize it. And if they succeed in it, to eliminate the anxiety by just becoming mental, cut the body off at the neck, etc., then they don't come to us, right? They don't have a problem, right? But these are people who, despite that, because of life circumstance, for example, they might have just fallen in love and gotten married. And so, despite themselves, their defenses, coping mechanisms, despite their, if you lose sound, let me know. I need to then.
No, it's all good.
Yeah. So despite themselves, they have the suffering. So only then will they come to pay good money, right? So what we're saying is that it's showing in some places, and when you and it cannot resolve, and the best way is to actually open up the doors so that the more and more parts of the body get involved in the emotion, which paradoxically will make it easier to be with it, and then it gets the brain to process it better according to the science of embodied emotions. So that is how it works, So it's not there. For example, sometimes, I also teach a trauma modality called somatic experiencing, or SE.
I had some questions about that in relation, but we'll come back to it.
This is the 28th year of my teaching SE. I teach, like about 20% of my teaching time is taken up by somatic experiencing. And so there people often think that there's a lot of energy in the freeze response. There is no energy in the freeze response. In the freeze response, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems are high in, they can cancel each other. Like one says breathe and the other says don't breathe, so you don't breathe. So how are you going to generate energy? There's no energy there. So it's when you undo the freeze, defenses, that the energy shows up, the activation shows up, the fear shows up. Like that, like that, the emotion is there in the psyche. Yeah. The emotion is prevented from being generated. And then, but it's being generated regardless, perhaps in the brain or some parts of the body. And the person is locked in this conflict between allowing it or not allowing it. And the tendency is to want to get rid of it. Like when I get up at night and I have a bad dream, guess what? The first thing I want to do, and I'm anxious or I'm not feeling good, the first thing I want to do is to check my social media to distract myself from the pain of it. So that's the innate defense, right?
Well, I guess I'm lucky. I have more of a Buddhist background. The first thing I want to do is just sit with it and see how can it pass.
Yeah. How can it pass? Now, I would go one more step with that, because we can't. If you just sit with it, you sit with it with all the defenses. It might not necessarily open up the defenses. It might or might not. So, so.
Yeah. But I guess one thing and it might be maybe semantical, because I half agree with you that when the freeze state, there isn't energy, and I could see it one way where there isn't, and if we're in like a complete fawn state where we're just we're not even present, we've just checked out. But I mean, I would say from my own experience working with people, when someone's in freeze can be a highly held contraction, which is energy.
That's what. No, at the energetic level, yes, but I'm talking in terms of the physiology here, in terms of the autonomic nervous system, the organs, glands, and the blood vessels. It's prevented from mobilizing energy. Now, if you say it is kept in place by an energetic defense on another level, then you're bringing in, the subtle body into the equation. So.
Okay, that clarification is helpful, because I thought you were more saying like there's nothing there, but there it's held. That's a little more helpful.
It takes a great deal of energy to actually inhibit the body.
Exactly.
The question is, where does the energy come from? The energy doesn't come from the physical body; it comes from the subtle body.
Well, I don't know, because it's hard to test that theorem.
It is hard. Yeah.
So I it's hard for me to say it. My own, what I really try to do in my practice is what I was sort of saying before, is sitting with people. So doing my best to sit with what I would say is to allow I'm going to bring it into conceptual framework, even though I believe in that moment it's prior to a conceptual framework. At least I believe that, is that by sitting with the client, allowing things to express again, not from a looking toward, it's a bit more non-dualistic or paradoxical, not a looking towards, neither a looking back, being fully present. And this is what I was trying to get to, maybe it's different than how you sort of teach it, but you are allowing things to become clearer in the client. My belief is, and this, I don't think any science on this, but the more safe we are within our nervous system, the more safe the client can feel, that there's a resonance in there, that there's a sense of this person has a sense of safety. You might disagree with that.
No, I don't disagree with that as a general framework.
Yeah.
But where we might differ is that if you just sit with and expect things to emerge, they're not likely to emerge. And if they emerge, they're not likely to expand because of the underestimation of the defenses. Innate defenses against suffering and psychological, energetic and somatic defenses. So.
Yeah, what I would say is that is the emergence. So the emergence of whatever is coming up is the emergence. And so if there's defenses, it is the observance of there is defenses coming up, and how do we then see that more and more and more?
Yeah, it's not clear whether the defenses will become observable. And if they do become observable, it takes more than just observation to shift the defenses.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And it's a hard place of balance. And it's also, I'm much more influenced by phenomenology. And the thing that I think phenomenology is great, but good luck trying to prove it, because so much of it is happening in the sensual realm prior to the information even being decoded. So there's almost no way that I could find that would bring the science in. So it won't hold here.
I'm actually interviewing Giovanna Colombetti. Have you?
No.
Who, along with Thompson, has written many papers on the phenomenology of the inactive mind and now the inactive emotion. And it's a wonderful book, the feeling body, where the inactive mind meets affective science. So, first person experience is very important, and we don't take that into we dismiss it in science by saying first person accounts, self-reports are not scientific, right? But even in my approach, for example, I don't care how the emotion is generated in the body. There are many theories of how the emotions generated in the brain, how they generate in the body, etc., etc., etc. I don't care. I'm only interested in the lived experience of emotion, right? Yeah. With a twist, because emotion ultimately is a meaningful assessment of how we are doing in the world in relation to different goals and in relation to different situations. And so it has to be involved the whole organism. It cannot just be simulated in the brain or created in the brain. So I say, I don't care. And in the book, The Practice of Embodying Emotions.
Yeah, which we'll put a link for as well afterwards, because I'd like people to find it.
Now, I say, the second section is all theory, all the different theories of how the body's involved in emotion and how the emotion can be experienced throughout the body, etc. Potentially, not all the time. It's not a prescription for life, living, but a therapeutic, insight to be used in the practice. I say, so ultimately, what really matters is what I also talk about all the different ways in which it can be defended in the body or at the energetic level. Ultimately, I say that all of that doesn't matter. What really matters is it comes down to, can you experience the emotion in more places than it's in the lived experience than before? That's what it comes down to, and through some simple techniques that anybody can use. We don't need the sophistication of a bodywork in order to open up the system. Of course, if you have that, all the more power to you. But not everybody can have access. So I talk about just how increasing the awareness. If there's a fear in the chest, just increase the awareness to more of your chest, because there's a tendency to, when there's a fear, there's a tendency for the awareness to narrow to it, focus on it, which actually because as awareness expands, energy expands, and through when energy expands, the experience follows, right? And so it's a simple thing. Or put your hand there with the intention to help the chest to, open up so that the emotion can be felt in more places. Or if you want to take it to another place, put one hand there, another hand there, and notice where the emotion is, where it is not. And, by entrainment, with the support of the hand, you can also expand the energy to the belly and also the emotion. So through things like that, I want people to start to do it right away, not wait for a therapist who's trained in the method. So it has to be simple. It has to be simple. Very few people can afford therapy or access therapy.
Yeah. It's definitely one of my things I do not love is when I get clients who are clearly in need and they can't afford it. And I do my best to support people how I can. I have different. I had actually an Uber driver once who we had a great conversation, He was from another country living in the U.S. And I just talk to people. My wife says I can talk to anybody. I'm fascinated by culture. I'm just fascinated by people. And he showed me actually a video of how like 2 weeks prior, his Uber car was stolen and then crashed and was on the camera. And he was visibly in trauma still just talking about it. And I realized there's no way this guy could afford me. And like that, please come in for a free session. Like, please at least something, because it isn't fear that people who can afford stuff get better health, but the world isn't fair. And so, doing what we can. So the fact that you're creating a book that people can read and get access is wonderful. Whatever.
Yeah. And I hear from therapists who just read the book and they start to apply it, and then they write to me and say, this really works, and I would like to learn more about it. So that's how people come to my trainings. So
I have a question that's a slight deviation, but it may not want to be answered, and that's fine. Which is, so I haven't read your book yet. I just heard you and said, "Wow, I really like this guy," and I could see hints of SE, but different than SE. And then similar, I recently read Lawrence Heller's NARM book. Yeah. And again, I could see similar to SE, but different. And what I found really interesting is, I don't want to make it better or worse, that it's not about categorizing it, but just seemed to expand it on from in both of these methodologies. And yet both of you teach for SE. And so I'm sort of curious how that, how does the SE world take that in? And how does that fit, or are they actually very different, or how does that work?
Well, they both approaches that work with the body, right? SE is focused on trauma healing, yeah, and it's based on a particular model, the threat response model, rest, orienting to threat, fight, flight, freeze, dissociation of different types, and tracking of the body through bodily sensations to work with these states, and to use resources to downregulate the system toward rest. That, in essence, is what SE is. Yeah, and there's another variation of it where we don't pay attention to the threat response model. It doesn't make sense to use the threat response model when somebody's grieving the loss of a child. And where we are, but then the freeze dynamics can still be there in order to inhibit the system from experiencing grief. That's overwhelming. So we can use what is called the SIBAM model, the different model of different experiences, the way you bring in the sensation to include the body, right? That's what the model is. It's very popular. In fact, I'm happy to report that among trauma therapists who use a body-oriented approach, or among trauma therapists, that's the universe, then the sub-universe of people, trauma therapists who work with the body, the most popular method is somatic experiencing, I see. And it's now in over 50 countries. And so it's a very popular model. Now,
I'll just say popular doesn't mean best. It just means most widely used, or most widely known.
It's more widely used. People find it useful. I believe. Yeah. I believe that people are not stupid. They gravitate toward things that work for them. Especially when they're in the face of in suffering. Yeah. So, and if they find a better alternative, they go to it. But there's a bias against the body, etc., that we don't have, about it. We don't have to get into.
Yeah.
But almost all somatic psychology modalities suffer in this regard when it comes to working with emotions, and this comes from this understanding that the experience of emotion in the body are the sensations in the body. This is, so you find it in Vipassana, you find it in mindfulness-based stress reduction, etc. So the way to regulate the emotion is to go down to the body and track sensations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in SE, to find a resource to make the body feel better and to regulate the emotion. But unfortunately, it actually does not necessarily work effectively with emotion. That technique. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about SE, all these modalities.
I get you.
And I've actually written a paper on, you can find it in the blog section of my website, how not to destroy emotions when you're tracking body sensations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Right? Because the body sensation tracking is such an effective tool for regulating the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotions, unpleasant emotions, are states of great dysregulation and stress. When you just let go of the consciousness of the emotion and start to track the body, of course, it's going to go away. So, and the integral somatic psychology approach is based on the new paradigm of embodied emotions and cognitions and so on. So it's a different paradigm, actually. Mm-hmm. And it can be used. So what I tell somatic experiencing practitioners, I teach them a little bit of this too, so that they can work better with emotions. What I tell them is that when you run into emotions and you find it difficult to, when you want to get to emotions, you can't get emotions. Or when you get into emotions and then it's very difficult for you to regulate it in the modality that you have, be it somatic experiencing or cognitive behavioral therapy, just, get off the freeway of your main modality and do the practice of embodying emotions for half a session or 1 or 2 sessions, and then get back on that. Go back to somatic experiencing. You'll find everything more fluid that way. That's what I say. So that I hope that is giving enough of an understanding of what the difference is.
That ties actually back into something I really appreciated you said about your book, which is these are potentials. You're giving examples, you're giving theories on working, and they're potentials, but they're ways of getting that awareness into either the person doing it to themselves or the therapist who's working with someone, and so that the person doesn't have to look at a book and say, "Oh, you're going here and here," but they have more of a subset of possibilities, and even within that, they can somewhat hybridize, where they say, "Well, this is somewhere in between these two theories, and I have a sense of how to work with that, so I now can find my own synthesized way of it because the wider framework is put out, but it's not exact." And I think that's really, really important, at least how I'm hearing it, because it allows.
That is true. But sometimes when you try to synthesize, then you can get into trouble.
Oh, for sure. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. So that's why I say, just use it as a complementary modality. Don't try to synthesize. Add it. I mean, if you mean synthesizing it that by, No,
I didn't mean it that. I meant more that, like, you in your book, you'll have examples of ways of working, and you'll get someone, and they'll be kind of in between these two ways. But because you've given these potential things, they know that this is not 100% how it's going to be. It's 99 or 98. And so sometimes modifying it a little bit of what you're doing and it allows for it. I didn't mean synthesizing with other modalities, although that could be. I worry. What I say with that is, well, all systems are inherently flawed, right? And so all systems are just limited. That's a nice way.
Yeah.
And I'd say that they're all maps. You can take a map of Asia and put it on Africa, and it'll work for a while, but eventually it's not going to work when you synthesize it. So you have to be mindful that synthesizing of different systems has value, and then sometimes you think you're in Rwanda, but you're really in Jakarta.
Yeah, that's why I like to use the term complementarity.
Yeah.
Use it when using it as useful. Now, there's another way in which I work with emotion that makes it easier to get to emotion. Very often I get in supervision. My client doesn't have access to emotion. And I say, impossible. Because you're feeling bad. Like, your clients come to you because they're feeling bad, right? Feeling bad is an emotion. You can just start with that and expand that. And then as they develop more capacity for that, because feeling bad is the fundamental dimension of all unpleasant emotions we don't want to feel, then it's easier then to feel sadness, easier to, to other things. I'll give you an example. I had a umbilical hernia surgery. They found in a routine check a little bit of a tear, and they said, you don't have to get surgery, but you have to be careful. You can't do any abdominal exercises or spinal exercises. And I said, I need to do them. Or you can't lift heavy luggage. I said, no, I want to fix it right now. And I did not anticipate the pain that I would experience after the surgery. Now, it was very, very painful. It took a lot longer, and I was working from India with all this high level of pain. And it turned out that the sessions I did were more effective. And I thought about why that might be, because in that moment, I was sitting with more pain. I was able to add capacity for more pain. I mean, I experienced it. I couldn't avoid it. And in the resonance, somehow clients could come more into their pain and more into their emotions. So, and this was just pain. And ultimately, the basic dimension of all unpleasant emotions we want to avoid is pain of some kind. You can call it discomfort or awfulness or feeling bad. So that way, you can always find an emotion. So I tell my students, don't come to me and say, I can't find an emotion in a client. That doesn't work. Then you're looking for some paradigm of basic emotions, etc., that you were taught in graduate school are the only possible emotions. No, feeling bad is an emotion. So.
Yeah. I'm wondering what that made me think about was self-immolation, which is incredibly painful, and yet people are able to do it without flinching. And I'm wondering, is it that what you're doing is also educating your clients how to be okay with life as it is?
Yeah, life as it is. Yeah. Because life is difficult. As Scott Peck said in the book, The Road Less Traveled, the famous first line of the book, the life is difficult, right? And Buddha said, life is mostly suffering. Yeah. And so in Buddhism, as well as in Hinduism, the traditions I'm more familiar with, even Christianity, forbearance is a virtue. Yeah, or I interpret that as the ability to tolerate or, be with the difficult experiences life brings without acting out in one way or the other, without, somatizing it or dysregulating one's energy or acting out cognitively through conspiracy theories or attacks or whatever it is that we do that ultimately is self-defeating, And so that's important. Yes.
Yeah. So, is just because I think I could talk with you for a long time because I enjoy this sort of topic, but I want to be mindful of your time and of listeners' time. Is there anywhere in particular we didn't go that you want to go more? Do you want to talk more about your book? Is there what's on Raja's mind?
I would say that if you get the book, you can get it on Kindle and paperback. The Practice of Embodying Emotions, a guide for improving cognitive, behavioral, and emotional outcomes. And the title should have been In All Healing Modalities, but the publisher said it's too long. Right. We cut it out. It's written in 3 sections. The introductory section, and then the theory section is in the middle, second section, and the practice section is in the end. So I would recommend that you read section 1 and section 3 and apply it to yourself as a reader, and then go to section 2, the theory section, if you're so inclined, so that you can directly benefit from it. And then if things get too difficult, of course, you can seek help. But because one thing we know about emotions is that the most important thing about emotional capacity depends on the availability of others to support it. but regardless of her age, that's the first determinant. And the second determinant is our attitude toward emotion, that we need to feel it and understand why it is important to experience it as a lived experience in a lived body, not just live from past experiences that are stored in the brain. We need to reality test in the body. And the third factor is to expand it in the body. That's because that's what the science says is the best way to, access emotion and regulate it, with multiple benefits. So you can also use it as a self-help guide. I have a group of book reading, and I have like a 12-step program. I don't have it. They approached me and they said, we would like to read your book. About 150 people, 200 people are reading it, and we would like you to give us a guide by guide, a chapter by chapter guide, and then appear from time to time, to answer questions. And I so thoroughly enjoyed, because these people are motivated by self-help. They want to use it, and they're really interested in growing, and I really like it that is happening. So
it's also nice to be in that. I think so much of this a big part of my practice is inquiry work. So when I'm working with people, even if it's physical, it's getting them to get things seen in a different way. And so if someone's reading that book and they have a question and they get to share it or to word it or say, that interaction can allow for so much of their own.
Exactly. And I invite people to write to me. They can go to my website, integralsomaticspsychology.com, and write to me, integralsomaticspsychology.com. There's another thing I want to say is that I also, because I'm come from Eastern, I also integrate Eastern psychology into approach. That's going to be the next frontier. What is the subtle body but the subatomic level of a body? And there's a lot of evidence for its existence. And there are many ways to work with it. And if you're, it's almost like when we don't work with it, then we're only half embodied. Of course, the embodiment is the gross body here, the womb to tomb body, but there's something that's governing it, influencing it, etc. If you don't take that into account, we kind of only half aware of ourselves and half embodied. And hopefully that will change in the next 100 years in Western psychology. But some people have made inroads like thought field therapy and emotional freedom technique. These simple tapping techniques have been so powerful that they have been recognized by the American Psychological Association. So I think I don't
know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It's actually a good thing. It's a good thing, actually. So I think they are so. It's a good thing because it's so powerful, and the evidence is overwhelming. That's why they've accepted it.
Yeah.
Whereas
I'm a bit more of a curmudgeon. What I find is when I work, again, at some point, maybe offline, I can kind of show you, I don't know if I'll be able to convince you, but show you a little bit more of the way that I practice, which is very similar, but slightly different. I find EFT to be just a way of convincing ourselves of something and creating a box around something. So like what I say is the fire doesn't go out, but we've put a box around the fire. And so since we don't actually see it, it works. And that's many things.
It has been quite effective in treating PTSD in Africa now through self-help and through a number of studies. The AP, American Psychological Association, is the last one that would accept something like that for accreditation, but they just have incredible outcomes research behind it. So
and the hard part for trauma is, where is it in the first place? How does it show up? And so if you can't actually measure it, getting a result that could be actually bottling it up more, but is not seeing it, it's hard to see. So again, I can only speak about my own personal experience. And when I work with people who've done that, what I found is a lot of them seem very happy. And what we do is uncover, oh, wow, there's actually something underneath that wouldn't be seen by anyone.
It does not work very well with emotional experiences. And that's what I find. And so therefore, to the extent to which people have emotional issues that they still need to work through, EFT does not necessarily do it. it just taps it away. So that I agree with.
Yeah. But I mean, as I said, I'm a bit of a curmudgeon. I don't know what works. I think that everything, like we said, has its limitations, and the issue is that we as humans are more dualistic, and so we say this and that, as opposed to, as you've already mentioned, a bit of both. You have to have a bit of both, and that's harder to also. It'd be harder for a big governing board to generally go into that, because that's also not the framework of which they do. They go into the studies, and you find the studies to prove it until the next study comes along that disproves, and you seem to keep going in that way and not realizing, maybe there's something else, but we don't have that yet. So we keep...
what we can say, in terms of outcomes research, what we know is that all modalities work. All modalities that have done outcomes research have shown that they work, right? And so that's not the issue. But what I would like to drive home today, again, I started with this, is that there's enough evidence now that if you don't work with the body in some way, I'm not talking about it through the practice of embodying emotions, then you're probably not, working up to par, not benefiting your clients as well. So,
I think that's a great way of bringing it all back together. And so I appreciate that. And I think that your book will be a good place that people can get more information. So
let me know. Let me know when you read it. Let me know what you think about it, and we can exchange emails or even talk about it.
I'd love that. And I look forward to hearing, and people, I will get your website. You'll send me all the stuff I need to put when I put the thing together, so people can also contact you, who, like you said, they can find more information, and they can.
I will send you an email with the different links. Yes.
Oh, that sort of stuff. Well, I like I said, I could talk more, and at some point, I would love to share a little bit about this what I've been sort of hinting at in various ways, but I can't actually express because it's pre-verbal. It's a way of embodying beingness, but that'll come at another time. For now, I just really appreciate you and your time, and how you do embody your emotion and yourself, and the way that you do hold space and time. It's been nice.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been lovely talking with you, Andrew. Let's chat again.
We'll chat again. Wish you a great day out there, and we'll talk another time.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, Raja.
Thanks for listening to us at Touching Into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about Raja at integralsomaticspsychology.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate it if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast and subscribe to it through the platform of your choice. When you do this, it really helps other people find us, and we greatly appreciate your support. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you on our next conversation at Touching Into Presence. Bye for now.